Do you see yourself? Look beyond the surface. See what is real in yourself and others.
Yeah, it would be a perfect world, wouldn't it, if no information was ever concealed from us and we could just go to absolute factual information. Unfortunately, we can't do that, so then we have to fall in love with that other realm of intelligence, that ancestral reservoir, which children, of course, have until it's knocked out of them. And we need to recalibrate that, because although it may be less formal and less organized than what we laughingly call fact half the time, it still can serve the same purpose. And we, again, as part of the earlier question about what can we do, it's linking back to that ancestral flow of intelligence, and whatever you can do, whatever it is for you, through music, through dance, through yoga, through whatever, is to get in touch again with that organic flow of intelligence. And then you will be beyond even the realm of what other people might need as fact and so on. You will have your knowledge, you'll have your knowing, which is a totally different thing.
All right, well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this special edition of Truth Warrior. I'm your host, David Whitehead, and I'm actually doing this interview on behalf of Modern Knowledge. This is something that myself and my partner, Chris Rusak, have created, and we launched our first tour this past year here, and it was very successful, and we've actually converted this into an online media hub. And the website that we have now, it's up and running, you can check it out, is modernknowledge.ca. And with the amount of interest and amazing support that we've had from people all over Canada, and also having tremendous amount of emails from people in other countries as well, we've already generated some more tours and upcoming events and interviews, etc. So the website, modernknowledge.ca, is the best place to visit so you can get all the information. And for today's interview, this is a historic interview that I'm going to be conducting with Michael Tsarion, and we're going to be discussing the female Illuminati. And Michael is actually going to be coming up to Canada and doing a series of talks on the female Illuminati. This has been some work that he's been doing for many, many, many years. And the last interviews that were conducted about this subject from Michael were probably about just over 2 years ago. And he's been busy doing a lot of research on these different points and has a lot of very detailed and fascinating information to share. So we're going to cover a few points in this interview today. We'll do a few follow-up interviews as well, so stay tuned on this. And this will all culminate in the upcoming events across Canada with Michael Tsarion about the female Illuminati. And for those that are tuning into this broadcast and are not aware of Michael's work, we'll give you a little background. Now, Michael was born in Northern Ireland, and he is an expert on the occult histories of Ireland and America. He is the author of the acclaimed books Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, Astrotheology and Sidereal Mythology, The Irish Origins of Civilization, and The Trees of Life, exposing the art of holy deception, the path of the fool, and the disciples of the Mysterium. Michael gives outstanding presentations on the Western magical tradition, the Hermetic arts of divination, Atlantis and prehistoric ages, ancient Ireland and the Druids, astrotheology, the origins of evil secret societies, the female Illuminati, which we're going to be discussing today, the war on consciousness, subversive use of sacred symbolism, symbolic literacy, and psychic vampirism. And his website is msar.com, and you can also get more information on Michael, the tour, and the female Illuminati at modernknowledge.ca. So Michael, it is a great honor to be able to do this talk with you today. I'm very, very interested in this subject and what you have to say. So welcome to Truth Warrior, and thanks for taking this time with me today.
Thanks, David. It's a great pleasure. Thanks for having me back on.
Oh, well, it's...
And I must say thanks, first off, to you and Chris for setting up the tour we're going to do. I'm really excited and looking forward to that.
Oh, as are we. And I think that we've got already so many people that are itching to learn more about this. They're excited that you're coming to Canada. I believe this is the first time you'll be doing a tour in Canada or any kind of event here, right?
Oh, yeah. First of all, I don't do many events. I'm very, very specific about who I work with, and so you guys have been working with me now for many years and doing superlative work. So that's a great team I've got finally, so It's an extra pleasure to work with good people who are also deeply informed and deeply committed to getting these more esoteric teachings out to the world. So I'm really excited about what we're going to do next year.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, I'm very excited too, Michael. And being informed, for me, it actually started with a lot of your work. I was watching a lot of your DVDs, reading your book, Atlantis, Alien Visitation, Genetic Manipulation. I was absolutely blown away, and it inspired me to really, really start to peel back the layers and look into these subjects. You provide so many sources in your work. You could literally spend a lifetime going in and checking the sources and looking at this. And one thing I've always really liked about working with you and observing your work is how you're always changing it up. You're always revisiting subjects and coming back and looking at it from a different angle. You treat it very much like an investigative process. And I think that's key when you're going to be analyzing any kind of, or trying to tease out any kind of truthful facts, is that you can't just stay stagnant in your view. And that seems to happen a lot in this field of research, is that people, they look at a book once, or they look at a source once, they go see a monument, and then they make up their mind on that, and that's their way of seeing it forever. And whereas what you're doing, and what I've been trying to do by being inspired by that, is to change it up and try to look at this from different angles. So I greatly appreciate that.
I think you're right there. It's an incredible tendency in people of all walks of life to fundamentalize and to limit. And the powers that be want us to do that. We learn these bad habits from academic teachings and from academic investigations, and it's a very big mistake when you're into the esoteric. You might be able to get away with it in the ordinary life of normal academic subject matter, because then you've got hoops to jump through and awards to receive, and you have to stick to a very traditionalistic model. But in esoteric traditions, that's the complete antithesis. And you're quite right. If you interviewed a detective, a criminologist, they will say that nine times out of 10, their work is to constantly review everything that comes in front of them, to reconfigure it like a Rubik's Cube, turn it over, turn it inside out. And I have this exact same methodology, because we're on the trail of the darkest figures. An ordinary detective wouldn't even know how to get in the starting line of the people that we're investigating, the beings we're investigating, the histories we're investigating. And so it's essential that you are because it's like this: either you outfox them, either you stand on the white squares of knowledge, or they will stand on it and they'll outfox you. It is absolute combat situation. We're in the trenches, and therefore the general needs to not just be sending men over the top to be slaughtered. We've got to find infinite subtle strategies. You've got to know thine enemy. You've got to have the picture of your enemy on the wall at all times. Be thinking, sleeping, and investigating, making your mind almost think in criminal terms, which the great detectives do, in order to have the scent of your enemy. And that's what my work is about. So it's never going to be stagnant. It's always going to be following this predator. Sometimes their footprints look like they're walking forward. Sometimes they've turned their shoes around and walking backwards. These are people who've been hiding their identity for centuries. They're really good at what they do. Now, it doesn't mean that they're invulnerable. It doesn't mean that ordinary, little hobbits can't overturn the Dark Lord. They bloody well can. And the time has come to do that. These people know that the light that they love is going to be shone on them. And so I hope that, my work inspires people to not just learn the facts and then shut down and say, well, I got the gist of that then. That's the end of that. It's the Jews, it's the Jesuits, it's the Masons, end of story. You got to be kidding. That's just scratching the surface. Let's go on further and further and further. And of course, there's only certain people with an intrepid nature can do that. A lot of people just simply shut down, know a few sound bites, and then that's it for them, Yeah. But and as far as my work goes, that's not going to cut it.
It's such a good point, and I think it's so important that people also realize that it's not just some topic that we're discussing that's just born out of pure interest. Oh, that's an interesting topic, looking at the history of darkness and evil on the planet. This is something that's actually essential to figuring out what's happening now in the world. We live in extremely tumultuous times, and it's very, very unstable in the geopolitical arena right now. There's a lot of dark things happening in the world, and yet a lot of people want to just stay in a state of ignorance because it's so dark and it's so repulsive what's going on, the true things that are going on, that the good people that mean well, are the ones turning away from it, when we need the opposite effect to take place. We need the people that have the light, that are inspired, that are passionate, that are moral, to be able to look at this and face it. And this is why these demons, for lack of a better word, are running amok in our society, is because of the fact that the good people do nothing. What would you think about that, Michael?
Yeah, well, 95% of what we call human history is prehistoric. So any person who, even with well-meaning intention, is trying to sum up what this human race has been up to by studying what's happened in the last 100 years or 200 years or 500 years, they're not going to get anywhere. They're going to scratch the surface. 95% of the human existence is prehistoric. So it takes, it's going to, at some point, if anyone wants to understand what's been happening in the last millennia or in the last couple of centuries, they're going to find that whether they like it or not, you're going to have to start dipping into the past, and then perhaps even to the ancient past. Then you're going to meet a wall, this wall I've talked about so many times before, where you're starting to enter into what they have craftily and cunningly called a mythological cycle, meaning we can dismiss anything about fairies and elves and wars of gods and powerful sorcery and weapons of mass destruction in ancient times. So it's okay for the Oppenheimers and all of these top people in rocket science, all the people that I mentioned throughout the Atlantis book, they've all believed in it. It's okay for Carl Sagan, it's okay for, Professor Obert and all of these other people to believe in it. But hey, you're not meant to break the code. You're not meant to start studying these ancient things. And then when you read what was going on, what the Celtic legends are saying, or any of the legends of the world, you're not meant to believe it. That's just folklore, that's just old wives' tales. And, it can be consigned to the rubbish dump. It's for children, and then even if it turns up in our modern world where it's being re-spoken through great science fiction, Frank Herbert's, the Gene Roddenberry's, the C.S. Lewis's, the Tolkien's, even then it's under the guise of fiction. It's entertaining. I read it on the train. I read my kids the Narnia Chronicles, but I'm not going to believe any of it. I'm too intelligent for that. Well, okay, keep on going. And as you say, our world is plummeting into darkness. Ignorance is rampant wall to wall. This technological dystopia is leading everybody to becoming robots with the loss of their humanity, but that's okay. I'm not going to believe anything my forefathers said about the coming of evil, the falling off of morality, or all these wonderful anecdotes that these ancient legends are talking about. And many of them talk about incredible things, as people who've read my work know. But to me, these are fascinating. They are telling us about modern times, and one has to be very respectful of it.
Absolutely, and that actually kind of leads me to a question that I've been dying to get your thoughts on, Michael, and it relates to this idea of looking at a lot of these ancient texts. It seems like there's two camps, and I've had many people on my show that come from both sides of the fence. I think they bring great information, but there's a difficulty bridging the gap. And those two camps would be, when looking at a lot of these ancient texts, one camp, of course, takes a purely mythicist position, where they think, yeah, it's just for kids, it's fairy tales. Or on the other hand, that it's just, it's all allegorical. You've covered a lot of astrotheology in your work as well. Some people interpret every single sentence, word, and line in these ancient texts as being purely allegorical astrotheological myths, encoded stories, if you will. And so I'm sure there's a balance of that as well. But then on the other side, you have people that are like, well, no, there's no great esoteric teaching in these writings. They are pure history, you know what I'm saying? So it seems like there's two extremes. And because you've done such great work on both fields, I wondered what your thoughts would be on bridging that gap, on the fact that, a lot of these texts are referencing both historic, and there are also astrotheological motifs in there as well.
I've been up against that problem since my early 20s, perhaps even before. We're, again, friends in Belfast, friends in Ireland, then going over to America. And I've tried to, my words automatically when I'm talking to people about these fascinating subjects, they are oscillating. They're like glazing over because, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that the Bible and even the, Popol Vuh or, these Irish myths you keep talking about, you're bugging me. This is just folk tales. Why should I think about it? And I'm talking to them as if it's quite literal. So you run into this issue where, and even me can sometimes wonder, what is this, and so it is a constant daily, checking of that to really discover, and nail it for yourself. that there is indeed these two great traditions. I call them just the exoteric versus the esoteric. And of course, we don't negate one for the place of the other. You have to always balance both. There's lots of exoteric things to study, which is how I got started, by going and looking around Belfast and taking measurements of geomancy, and also looking at the symbolism that's right there. They haven't concealed it. It's right there in front of somebody. So that's exoteric. It's right there. Those red dragons, those Masonic symbols, and whatever else, all of these different statues. These are exoteric to the extent that there they are in 3D. But then once you start deciphering and decoding, you automatically are then stepping into a more shadowy, esoteric world. Up until very recently, nobody was interested in that world. The Holy Blood and Holy Grail that book was only written in like 1980 or something like that. And then, the Da Vinci codes of latter years. And then the appeal, then you have to deal with the appeal to the masses. So still the masses of the world. I mean, people listening to your show, listening right now, they're already pretty much into the esoteric tradition, and it's a no-brainer for them. But the vast majority of the world to this day is still uncomfortable with that. They cannot grasp that these, even to take the Da Vinci Code scenario, if we hone in on that, the very idea that book and books of its nature are trying to tell us, which is that there's an exoteric and an esoteric within Christianity, mostly throws people for a total loop. Opus Dei and the Knights, those guys, the Knights Templar. Okay, so they're over here doing something, and then we have these. Are they the good guys? The Pope, the Vatican, and then if they switch it, and if a dramatic work tries to switch this around, like no, it's the more shadowy guys are actually the good guys. Can you download that? And these more official guys, the Pope and his coterie, they're kind of bloodthirsty evil. I mean, that's just no-brainer beginning stuff to anyone who studied 5 minutes of history. And yet the masses of the world find that so exciting that they're lining up to see it in a movie form. So what do you do with that? Well, you go, okay, that's good, even though, one could say, I wish people had grasped this years ago. So mankind takes extremely small steps. New ideas take generations, not decades, to sink into people's minds. So you have to look at it as, it's bittersweet. We say, oh God, I wish they knew more. But at the same time, I'm glad they know this much at least, because now we can build upon that. So it's going to be a constant in your individual life with your individual friends. You're going to find this dichotomy that you spoke of, and also on the broader scale, when you start writing books, doing public talks, whatever, you're going to meet it again, where you're going to have beginners of beginners coming in, clueless, frightened, hateful almost, muck-slinging at you, and you just have to look at them and say, okay, carry on what you're doing. It's not going to stop me. I've made a lifetime study of this, so we go forward. And then you can maybe nudge forward, like I've done in my work, to say, well, both these esoteric and esoteric cabals are psychopathic. And there's also good guys in both. So it's not that because they will think that you're a fundamentalist trying to say, oh, now you believe in the pagan form of Christianity. Well, we've been taught not to like that. I go, no. I'm saying that there's good people in the exoteric branches. There are good priests out there, good clergymen. They're very moral people trying to do good. They're not all evil. And then on the esoteric side, there are great white magicians as well. But also you get psychopaths in each. So I'm not a fundamentalist saying I align with one or the other. It's just that as a researcher who knows things about these secret societies, you try to then introduce your audience to the fact that there's a certain kind of psychopathy that is, as I said before, infinitely greater than any common garden detective has ever encountered in his life. I mean, these are people who've seen cannibals eating their victims, all right? Even that's small potatoes to what's been going on the higher level of the Queen Victorias and, these more malicious creatures at the top of the ladder. And they smile for the camera and everybody dribbles. But the thing is, these royal families and the people behind them from whom they maintain order, you have no idea of the psychopathy we're dealing with. So it takes many decades for a person even to get round to that, because the kind of evil that they're even thinking of is more your Walt Disney cartoon version. They have no idea of the hidden hand, the dark, hidden, secret hands of absolute evil that control the destiny of nations and tribes, and they have done it for millennia, not just centuries. So, of course, it's hard to download that for somebody, especially in the first 5 minutes when an eager beaver tries to introduce, a certain friend or person to this conspiratorial history, this criminal history of not only mankind, but as I'm doing in the female Illuminati, the criminal history of female kind. This is, come on, it's like surgery.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is, because it's, first of all, it's new, and of course most people are afraid of what they don't understand. So if they look at something and they hear a sound bite and then they make their opinion about it, most of the time it's coming from a fear-based reaction, or it's just a knee-jerk reaction where they criticize it instantly right off the cuff. I mean, anytime you even use the word Illuminati or the Illuminati, most average everyday Joes are just going to look at you sideways like, what are you talking about? That's just for the movies. That's just Hollywood. There's no real Illuminati. You guys are crazy, right? But
Yeah.
as we see, there are actual historical groupings of very elite psychopathic individuals and groupings that have been there behind these historic revolutions, the movements of empire, the rise and fall of civilizations, and on and on and on it goes. And there is documentation there. Maybe, Michael, we could start with sort of a brief synopsis of some of your previous work on the Illuminati and some of these occult orders and secret societies. And of course, we are talking about the darker side of this, we're talking about these dark magicians, so to speak, so that people can get an understanding of the reality of the fact that these types of orders and groups absolutely do exist.
Well, right. I mean, and any work that I'm doing now is absolutely a carry on of what I've done before. It's not breaking any traditions. It's not really turning, any U-turns or anything like that. I looked at the whole goddess tradition thing in a program I'd done before called the Divination and the Goddess Tradition, in which we looked at the role that women have played in civilization, and and also deeply on the esoteric side we looked at that, and also looked at the crimes that have been perpetrated against women. Anything I'm doing on the female Illuminati needs to be aware that I'm no misogynist who's just hacking away because I got nothing better to do, on the criminal history of womankind. This is a very serious academic work that draws on the books and writings of the greatest feminists and the greatest female psychologists, and so on and so on and so on. And also, I have already in my work written and presented many programs, on the positive aspect of the role of females in civilization in general. But as I've moved forward in time from the Atlantis book, what I've done is I've honed in, like I've done with Trees of Life, for instance, that 2-volume work, on trying to focus in on the more cardinal secret society ideology and symbolism, because all through my work it's been a distillation, I should say, of this etymology and the symbolism, getting deeper and deeper and deeper. You start with one thing, then you perfect it, and you go further and go further. And so the female Illuminati is nothing more than a carry-on of that journey into the symbolism and into the etymologies, wherever that road might lead. And like in Trees of Life, that was a specific work which honed in on some specific very important occult symbols that the elite are particularly fond of, and that other people may not even know are that important. So this was almost a master work, 700 color pictures, incredible research in that book. And then after that was written, the process carries on again. So the female Illuminati is more again going down, looking deeper and deeper into the various symbolisms and the etymologies, into the esoteric tradition, to again tease out some of this more occult. For instance, why did the Merovingians really have long hair? Why do they, worship the skull? And all of these things. You just get deeper and deeper and deeper into the Masonic symbolism, their G, their serpent, whatever. One could go on ad infinitum on that very matter. Why is America symbolized by a Statue of Liberty, which is female? Why do the presidents sit in the Oval Office, which is female? All of this kind of thing. Just taking stuff that I dealt with in the Atlantis book and then continuing to tease it out to find out what is really, really going on. And then what had happened was that the core of the Atlantis book was, of course, this phenomena in prehistoric times of the descent of the Nephilim, the fallen angels coming to our planet, interfering with us on so many levels. That was genetic, which then is one thing that happened that caused the human consciousness to be fragmented. There was actually about 4 or 5 things that actually contributed to this. But one kind of selfhood, one kind of consciousness was destroyed. And that's what we dealt with in the Atlantis book, of how that happened, who perpetrated it, and so on. And I was using terms in that, like the Nephilim and the sons of the serpent and all of this kind of thing. And the Tree of Life figured very heavily in that research. and as did the ancient texts that speak of this very thing. Because this is not an invention of Michael Tsarion. You know, there's been great scholars who've looked at this before, especially the matter of cataclysm, and they've also looked into the whole matter of off-world beings living on this planet or interfering with us in certain ways and all. But what had happened was that they had never ever spoken of what kind of consequence that kind of visitation might have had on consciousness itself. This was a part that was only broached by one author, you know, who I mentioned in my book, called Jack Barringer. He was about the only one. And I know Jack, and we've talked about this, and his book launched this for me.
This was Past Shock, right?
Yeah, Past Shock. He was the one who, brilliant book, small book, but again, a key book for me because it did address briefly this concept of what might have happened to the psyche of man. He wasn't sitting in some armchair when all of this hullabaloo was taking place. He was absolutely, you know, mentally and emotionally destroyed. And so then that was the start off point. But central to that then became the different texts, the different legends of the ancient peoples of the world, both Native American, Indian, and other, that also speak of this. Sometimes they do it in a more cryptic way, others they do it more clearly. But then you move on to even biblical scriptures that are accepted by modern scholars, for instance, like the Book of Enoch, or various apocryphal works. But you can even turn to the Bible itself, Genesis 6, which mentions the coming of these beings and so on. And that was then, I noted this in the Atlantis book, that in the famous descriptions of the coming of the Nephilim, they're not really specific on whether or not those Nephilim were male or female. They just sort of hint that they were all male, you know, like Lucifer or what have you, and his coterie. But other works are, you know, for instance, what about the presence of Lilith and these kinds of characters? And then when you turn to the Sumerian prototypes, and this is where things start getting really interesting. All the biblical, all of the stuff of the early creation that you read in the Bible and the coming of the Nephilim and all of this interference that they're talking about, the presence of Lucifer, the presence of Lilith, the tree of life scenario, all that is so much more unpacked in the prototypical Babylonian Sumerian stories. But then they're including a bevy of women, indicating that the gods were not just of male, you know, they were androgynous. And also there was women, bona fide women involved, not only in trying to assist mankind, but also trying to deceive mankind and up to all sorts of other tricks. So then you start to say, okay, so what do we get? This Nephilim was then maybe, you know, bisexual, or they had males and females. Then you look to the Book of Enoch and something I thought that was even more important, but when I noted it, in order to investigate it at that point when I was writing the Atlantis book, it would take me off into millions and millions, you know, all these diversions with millions of other questions, and I just didn't want to do that. This was going to be my first book, and there were so many interesting things. I'm still getting emails today, you know, for people saying, "Hey, Michael, what about this or what about that?" And I say, "Yeah, I know, I have my thoughts on that. I wanted to include it in the Atlantis book, but that would have just completely not been correct at that time. I needed to lay this down in a certain way that concentrated the reader's attention on things that have happened on this earth, and I had to forego, you know, talking in more speculative terms. But the thing that I was going to mention is that in the Book of Enoch, when it talks about how the Nephilim seduced, quote unquote, you know, or came in upon the women of the earth and tried to conceive by them, and there's other works that even show you that they did try to have normal conception, and that went completely awry, and some strange hybrid beings were being born, and that didn't work. Then there was a change in tactics, you see. And I believe that change in tactics was a genetic thing in which genetic children, these hybrid children, were born. And mythology is absolutely loaded with stories about immortal beings taking mortal women. And it's right down through the Celtic and you name it. There's so many traditions have this motif. Now, why? And I'll tell you why. It's because it happened. And the thing is that there's some sort of conception was then a more technological conception, but these children were born, and they were the famous heroes of antiquity. In this, raising those children, just in, you know, people who are new to this should ask themselves the question that every single tyrant that's ever lived on this planet, from Godfrey Bouillon down, didn't they have mothers? Didn't they have sisters? Didn't they have wives? Weren't wives themselves queens, and when they were often just as tyrannical as any man who sat on those same thrones? The world is not full of wonderful queens who, when they were on the thrones of the world, turned our planet into a paradise. I've never heard of even one case of that. So let's start asking some questions about that, you see. But going back to the biblical thing, it started to dawn on me that where is the account of the great war of Armageddon when the men rose up to save their women from the powers of the Nephilim? Where is this great epic about how the women resisted? Yeah, I'm turning over a lot of pages here, reading through a lot of stuff here. Let's turn to this. Let's turn to this account over there in the Far East, and you go north, south, east, west, and read all that there is. And we know that so much has been hidden. But from Genesis onwards, the Book of Enoch, Book of Jasher, Book of Baruch, and all that plethora of other texts out there, I don't hear one account of any resistance put up by any female when it came to dealing with the visitation of the Nephilim. On the contrary, some texts are even saying that the women found these beings comely and were attracted to them and found them handsome. So then, my mind, as I said, this detective part of my mind just goes, this is very interesting, because as a matter of fact, it transforms. And if you don't, if you go back into the Sumerian, they're saying the same thing. There is, after all, in the Bible, this creature called Lilith, a very different creature than Eve. So then one starts to say, what would, if I unpack this, and after you start reading some Nordic stuff and you go through the ancient stuff, you got more than you can imagine on the board. And so when you say, well, wait a minute, if I start looking at all of this, I'm afraid that this actually turns over, upside down and inside out, all the history of humankind that we've ever been sold. So in the Atlantis book, I did deal with the women, these Eves, who I called them at that time, implying that there were more than one, a race almost, who were very instrumental in saving the day. So that you and I can actually be talking about this now. There was an enlightened group of women who didn't go for the contract and resisted the power of the Nephilim and the latter warlocks that the original Atlanteans had given rise to. So for a period of maybe centuries and maybe even longer, there was a fallout in which the women were instrumental in setting up much, much more positive civilizations. But then it occurred to me that not every woman would have probably gone for that gig, good as it was. What about these other women that may have, as these texts are saying, went with the gig and did collude with the enemy, so to speak? And so then this opened up the door for me to start slowly putting together the story of the Dark Sisterhood, dipping again back in part of the esoteric tradition. But one other thing before I finish needs to be mentioned as well, and that is that when these sorceresses and their masters unleashed the various kinds of warfare, maybe even a bacteriological type of Holocaust, you see, that wiped out the whole male race at the time because they were relying on their technology, you see. And just like I mentioned in the Atlantis book, they relied on their technology and didn't need the musculature. And when the women were seduced, they also said, we don't need these Mark I males, and so we're going to wipe them out. And I believe that a genocide of that nature did happen, and I believe it happened globally. And then the next point is, why don't we know about it, is because of trauma. As I've always pointed out throughout my work, trauma, trauma, trauma. You must understand trauma through and through. And even on a basic trauma that happens in daily life, or the more correct technical term is dissociate from that trauma. You actually just forget about it and then forget that you forgot about it. Now, I believe that several events of this amnesia, several instances of historical amnesia have occurred, and this is one of them. There's been others. Actually, we've even had a historical amnesia about the catastrophe.
Yeah.
People won't even accept that there's been a physical catastrophe, even though the Michael Knowles and so many other people have shoved the information in people's faces. They won't even bite down on the physical, let alone the emotional ones and the psychological ones. But I do bite down on it, and I do believe these things. And I think that one of these great dissociations, one of the great historical amnesias, has been about the conflict between the genders and the role that women had in ancient times, both good and certainly bad. But just like Joseph Campbell and others have said, and Jung has said, the truth leaks out anyway, right? In the psychology, in the mythologies, in the poetry, in the blockbuster movies, in
music and everything.
Exactly. See, in the culture, these motifs, we might not be able to decipher them. Why does Moses have horns? Well, let's get a debate on that and a round table on that one alone. And it's like starting at A and then you have to go to Z, and it takes thousands of years. What's it all about? Why did Jesus get crucified on a hill? Oh my God, each one of these parts you can just write volumes on. So digging back is no easy job. You're digging back through cobwebs, you're climbing through attics, you're digging through God knows what, treasure troves and pulling out all sorts of relics. And you have to have the correct keys of decipherment, which takes almost a lifetime to gain in the first place. And the enormous symbolic literacy that also needs to be cultivated as you're walking around. Because let me tell yet again to anyone who's maybe listening to this new, you just need to take your dog for a walk down your local town. And if you have the correct keys of decipherment, everything that I'm saying right now is right in front of you. There is an exoteric aspect of this as well. And that is why the fountains and the obelisks are in circles, or Vesica Pisces. That's why Holy Mother Church is called Holy Mother Church. There's a reason why the priests dress in female garb, and so on and so on and so on. There's a reason why the queen is the strongest piece on a chessboard. Right? There's a reason why one of the words for the serpent, Nahash, also meant beautiful. Not only intelligent, but of beauty, great beauty. Well, does that describe men or does that describe women? We have incredible stuff out there in plain view that people should understand. Why were the ancient Sumerian kings always under the goddess, or their titles were things like digger of the garden, keeper of the garden, servants of Asherah? Well, who the hell is Asherah? And again, those horns on Moses' head, or various stuff that we read throughout the Bible. Why did the Bible have it so that Jesus has an earthly mother, but the father is almost cast to the side? This Joseph is almost non-important. Where did that motif come from? Why isn't it just, he had an earthly father and an earthly mother? But Mary is exalted, but Joseph is definitely not. And I could go on and on and on with the, references. The incredible, like I said, stories of immortal men, immortal beings actually, married to mortal women. The fact that in many cultures, the female priestess or the female queen had to initiate even that which the pharaoh did, down the line. This even goes for much of Celtic mythology. Why do the Illuminati have the Minerva, a goddess Minerva, and her various symbols? There's many of them, but the owl and the butterfly. Again, look on your television screens, look at the advertising. You'll see that butterfly, you'll see that dove, you'll see that spider, you'll see that owl. All over the place. Whole buildings are designed like that. You'll see labyrinths, you'll see spirals, you'll see ovals, you'll see circles, you'll see pentagrams, mandolas, vesicas. What does the word city mean? It's cetus, the womb, the vagina. When you get into it, order of the garter. What's a garter? Once you start getting into it, and as I said, this has been hidden from us because it's so easy. They're brilliant at doing it. Like I said, you see these great statues of the male knight riding on the horse. You see them in every city of the world. Do anyone know that the horse is a pun on the word whores? So why is the king riding the whores? Who are the whores? Who are the widow's sons? Why is Hiram Abiff and Masons known as a widow's son? Are we digging? Are we finding out? Masons wear aprons. Why are they wearing aprons? Who told them to do that? Who told of all the designs you could have, the presidents are sitting in an Oval Office? Everything about the initiation of the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and the building of not only Philadelphia, but Washington, D.C., every single part of it happened under two signs. America's natural birthday, Cancer, the female sign, and the other sign is Virgo, the most important of all the female signs. And then under specific stars like Sirius, which is sacred to Isis, Spica, right, which was, again, sacred to the female goddess. Oh, why? Isn't there any male stars or conjunctions or aspects that they could have been working with? Sure there is. But even in the Battle of the Boyne, and then you start building this out. They say that Ireland was discovered by a daughter of Noah. Why not a son of Noah? Who is this Casser that they claim came out of the flood and was the first person to set foot on the Ireland after the deluge? So you're bumping into this stuff all over the place. As I say, we deal with the esoteric aspect, but one only has to, what's the most famous cathedral in France? Chartres Cathedral. It's built over the site of the ancient goddess. You're tripping over it when you start getting into it. There's not a hero you can think of, from Cuchulainn to Finn McCool to I don't know who wasn't either initiated by a witch or a female personage. Even King Arthur got his sword from the so-called Lady of the Lake. As I say, it goes on and on and on. It's just, we'll all be dealing with this stuff because we have to start, again, as you said at the beginning, turning this Rubik's Cube around, walking around the crystal, fondling it, You know, who are these prostitutes that the modern masculine patriarchy rescripting the power of this ancient cult of women, or these sects? It's right there in front of you. It's just that they call it the fallen women or the prostitutes. But you want to do some etymology and to find out that that word meant herodolai, beloved one, sacred one? Do you want to do some etymology on the word Mary and find out that that meant beloved one, and always referred to one of these extreme high-class female powers? They were also called virgins. Virgin is one of the actually most misinterpreted terms you could ever come across anywhere, especially in the literature of the world. The simple term virgin birth or virgin, my goodness, that word alone will lead you on a merry dance, you know, let alone getting into all of the other Kabbalistic symbolism that Masons are all with their insider smile. You know, it goes on and on and on, you know.
It's so interesting, Michael, and there's so many incredible points in that last talk you were doing. And it's just, if you think about what you were mentioning about how just in the game of chess that the queen is the most powerful piece, we have these sort of sayings that people say and they don't really think about the meaning of it, which is that, you know, behind every great man is a greater woman, right? And you look at the very characteristics of you know, women in general, and this isn't, like you were saying, this isn't just a discussion of trying to say this is a battle of the genders that we're trying to incite here. This is an examination of the genders and why there are certain characteristics that are more dominant in women and other characteristics more dominant in men. It seems that you know, women are very good at organizing. They're very good at you know, doing, you know, multitasking and things like that. There's certain, it seems as if there's certain talents that are instinctive that they have that could, you know, easily be used for either good or evil, right? And if you go back historically, and you were mentioning that there was sort of like this group of females that may have rebelled and tried to stop what was going on, this group of Eves, maybe a lot of women don't think of the origin of the suppression of women throughout history as being from women themselves, right?
Yeah, and then there's absolutely good reason for that. We have, because remember, in my work, I'm never underestimating the cunning, cruelty, absolute psychopathy of the males that have been, you know, of the extremist version, the malignant masculine, which you cannot look at any malignant femininity without always balancing that out. I know people will still spit at me, you know, even though I do that. I know even though my work has done it for years. You come up with something new, and of course they're going to, you know, knee jerk on that. But there's been a reason for that. I went into this in the divination and the goddess tradition to show how this malignant patriarchy has worked overtime to completely boulderize the positive aspects of female cults in the past. Let us never, you know, doubt that those female groups existed. You know, we know that some people will concede that, oh yeah, we had the Amazons, you know, and other groups have come to light through work of various scholars. But there was much more than that. The Amazons were just but one Scythian group of women who had their own, you know, system. But there was many others who ruled in civilization for centuries. All of this information has been completely hidden, you know. But you, as I said, you find evidence of it because the three words that this whole planet uses for God, Jehovah, Elohim, and then the Jews also use a word called El Shaddai. Every one of those well-worn terms for God are androgynous terms. In fact, I'd even go further. I'd say they're feminine. Both the Jehovah and the Elohim, right? Their suffixes show that the word is actually feminine. And El Shaddai is the same. In fact, Shaddai in Shad, S-H-A-D, in Hebrew means breast. So they're calling the Jewish God is called He of the breast. Well, He of the breast is actually she of the breast, by the way. Okay, small detail there. But it goes for the Jehovah's and the Elohims as well. So one doesn't have to do what I've done, which is written volumes on the Celtic, you know, the Irish, proto-Irish roots of the tree of life. Let's not even go there. Let's not even go into any of those dark shadows. Just the simple etymology of those three terms shows you something's up. So, but why then has it been? I mean, even the Amen that they're using at the end of prayers is a female word. It was an Egyptian word representing the moon goddess. So, and as I said, all that stuff you see in the symbolism of Catholicism also, you know, being, I mean, even the Vatican is literally been laid over, you know, the tombs of Aphrodite and what have you. There's hardly a Catholic sacred site east, west, north, and south, that isn't have been planted on a hill of Diana or a hill of sacred to the goddess previous, and then you start to say, okay, so we do see a malignant masculinity at work but that's the point I'm on. That's part of the trail I'm on. It is because of the evidence of a masculinity that is malignant that when you start following it, you don't know where it's going to lead. But we're not doubting the phenomena of malignant masculinity in religion or in other areas. This extreme penchant for war, the individual man's misogyny towards the individual women who probably don't deserve it. We're not denying any of these things, but that is a phenomenon. And if you try to study it, then studying is getting to understanding. You get to the understanding of the thing. And when you dig down on a particular phenomena, you may come to a place which is quite different than what people, who are sniffing those at the top believe and have been taught to believe. Could it not be a malignant femininity that at the root of the rotten tooth? So that would mean that the masculinity, and I'm speculating here, but the malignant masculinity, which has been the bane of thousands of years, could have its roots in something prehistoric that, as I said, happened, but then there was an amnesia that we do not know about and can almost never know about. And that all the other scholars, both exoteric and esoteric, have missed this piece. Well, I'm the kind of person who says, I think they may have done, and I'm just going to carry on. I don't conclude yet. And when I present my work on the subject, I don't ask people to say, this is the end of the story. You can come to your own conclusions. You can say, I think everything he said is bullshit, and walk away, and I'll be quite happy. Or you can say, this movement is very special. Like Michael says, we're standing on a pedestal, which is the best time we could possibly be on to review some of the things of the past, because our forefathers just simply didn't have the internet, and they didn't have the books, and they didn't have the scholarship to rely on. Geniuses may have conceived of some of these things, but my God, they could never do what we're able to do today. And we owe it to them to look clearly back at history, because we have been had. And therefore, this is what I'm doing. And people can either join me in that experience, or they can immediately become fundamentalistic again and say, no, I'm going to stick with what I've been taught by the establishment. And that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, it's up for everybody to do their own inner searching and external searching as well. They're going to have to take this on board for themselves. And Michael, as you were talking, it was getting me thinking about some of the things you were bringing up in your talk on 2012, how you were talking about racial memory and genetic memory and phylogenetic memory, cellular memory, etc., of how there is a memory that's carried out throughout the genes and throughout history that a lot of even psychologists have talked about, like Carl Jung, etc., and how this has had an impact on even human beings in a modern time. And I think we underestimate how these traumas from the past have affected us today. And it also brings into mind some of these myths and legends talking about the birth of the genders. You were referencing one of the quotes, I believe, I'm not sure who quoted it, but they were talking about how Zeus was sitting around with the council of gods, and they were figuring out a way to maintain their hegemony over the human race. And so they said, well, let us cleft them in two, and that way they'll be forever searching for their missing halves. And it just sort of, for me, was the quote of this, the beginning of the battle of the genders and all of these different things. And so when you get into the myths, and then you look at the race memory, and you look at the evidences of today, and as you said, you get into these malignant female characters throughout history. You even get into the birth of having women considered citizens and people, back in when, but this was of course financed and set up by, I believe it was the Rockefeller coterie, when they were trying to liberate women's liberation. There was funding, and there was organized funding and structure behind that. So a lot of women today think that their liberation came out of something that was good. Oh yeah, we finally became recognized, but then we know that this was done specifically so that women could be taxed equally, and they could generate more control ultimately over both men and women. So there's all kinds of things to get into that, but I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about how important it is, this phylogenetic or cellular race memory, and how we are underestimating how that still affects our consciousness today.
Well, see, look how it affects us. If what I'm saying is true, right? For instance, that there was this dark sisterhood who, were their symbolism is on the front, but they themselves conceal themselves behind the masculine societies. Let's say the secret societies that we're familiar with, right? But then we start to get on the trail through looking at the symbolism on money and on coins and in the city squares and what have you, right up to things that we're in the age of Kali. Even some Vedic scholars believe our whole age is under a sort of a dark goddess. I mean, what more could you want than that? And as I say, the instances all over the world, from the Etruscans to the Celts to the ancient Greeks and certainly the Egyptians, the exaltation of the female, that the pharaoh had to become pharaoh by marrying the great royal wife, the approved female being, that every single structure, that means every temple, anything sacred that ever stood, from an obelisk to a temple, couldn't even be inaugurated. You hear about masons laying the stone, and you hear about Palava today. Yeah, but in ancient days, the stone was actually laid and sanctified by a female, by the priestess who represented the goddess. The symbol of the orb and the wings and the two serpents over the doors of every sacred place in the ancient world, from Sumeria to the Phoenicians, to the Canaanites, to the Minoans, Cretans, Philistines, and Egyptians, most famous of all, and even the Celts. That's a female symbol. So when you walk into the portal itself is dedicated to the goddess Nephthys. The whole damn temple is an image. Even the Jews concede this in their Temple of Solomon. Yeah, that's the temple, but inside is a Holy of Holies, which every person who studied Judaism knows is a Shekinah. It's the female symbol, period. And then how the Shekinah motif turns up in the deep Kabbalah. When you're really studying the Kabbalah, you find out that the whole Kabbalah is a tree of life, ergo the female. But that tree of life then turns up in the Bible. You see, so you have to dive in. You have to become like this mercurial person who's able to study all of these things, have everything on the desk, get your arms around all of this information. But to answer your question is this, is that it is not just men in this planet who've got to deal with their guilt and their need to evolve. It's not only men who've got to realize that when they charged off down this lunatic road, like Patrick McGowan and so many pointed out in his Prisoner series, of technology and progress for the sake of it. And maybe they need to put the brakes on that and change again, and maybe ask questions about, was that the right road to go on, that we've now turned the world into a nightmare? So men have the questions to ask about their personality and their psyche and their characterological traits, right from the domestic to the corporate. But what, women are just going to go shopping and forget about it? Women have to take a deep look at who they are as well and ask themselves a question. Are they happy with who they've become? Are they happy the way the world is? Well, women trudged into the munitions factories to build the bombs and the bullets in both First and Second World War, and are still doing it, to destroy women and children. You think Dresden was only bombed by men? You see? So we've got, let's hold a mirror up to both sides and ask from the domestic to the corporate level, are women happy with the freedom that they got? Don't you know that the Illuminati periodically hand you a carrot in order to keep you from exploding? I don't know a woman today who knows that. They think that their newfound freedom and their so-called, modicum of a sexual and social freedom that they got, they're crying out, thinking this great thing. It was an award. It was a privilege, just like the driving license is a privilege, pal. They can take it away as fast as they can give it to you. Yeah. Or they might give it to you for duplicitous reasons, so that now you go buck mad. They know that a person, like a third world country that's been held under a third world status for years, the moment that you give it a few refrigerators and some Coca-Cola, just watch them go berserk. Well, it's the same on every level. Give a modicum of freedom to somebody who's been held down for centuries and watch them go apeshit as what's happening. This is how things happen. Does that mean it's good? Does it mean that you're helping society, helping the world, helping civilization? Of course not. What you've become is a malignant version of femininity. You become a malignant version of masculinity. Today, the words masculine and feminine, just like the word virgin and many other words I deal with, these talismanic terms, is probably the most abused terms. How can you know what masculinity is when its mirror is malignant? How can you know what true femininity is when its mirror is malignant? So we have had homework to do. Both male and females today have to step out of the objective, from a studious point of view, step out objectively from the roles that they've inherited and start asking bigger questions about who they are on the canvas of greater life. Because all of our civilizations are crumbling. And man is responsible for that, and so is women. And both genders have to look into their psyche to find out what are the hidden aspects, what are they contributing to, what are they responsible for, what are they guilty of, and what should they be proud of. And in this work, which you could call psychological or whatever, I just call it spirit work. It's the work of spirit, to find out who and what you are on an existential level, and then after you find that out, move out, to the world. But this homework has to be done, because it'll be imbalanced if only one small group do it. If a person goes through their whole life, David, assuming that what they know of their own manhood is, yeah, kosher, okay, cool, and the woman goes through her never questioning what some of the what it is it to be really female. What is that, a custodian of something? Is there a higher duty that needs to be performed? For thousands of years, women held a grail of spirituality for the whole planet. May have invented some of the architecture of what we call civilization. Not that most men have ever wrote about it or accepted it, but it's a fact. And should our civilization start to melt down, who's going to be there to succor? Who's going to be there to give, mankind, so to speak, any kind of hope to build anew? Man had the physical strength, he had the tenacity, and he had the muscular strength, but women have strength. In the village, they constituted an incredible strength of emotional strength and psychological strength, which is absolutely required for the other masculine strength to have its to focus on those strengths. One strength can't exist without the other.
Well, and as you said earlier, any man born was nurtured by a mother. You need that nurturing, motherly aspect. So that's the positive side. And of course, on the darker element, that can be manipulated to sucker people in, because everybody requires that motherly, nurturing figure. They require that love and that warmth. And that connection, and so that can also be manipulated. So that's why I think what people also need to take into consideration.
Look at Jesus. Many times, the greatest, most poignant stories is in the presence of Mary, one or the other. The mother of the Mary, the famous birth of Jesus is in the presence of his mother. The famous pieta of his death, coming down from the cross, he falls into the hands of his mother. At his resurrection, 3 women turned up to bathe and take the body at his resurrection, not the men, right? So in the life of every hero, you don't see Horace half the time when he's not sitting on the lap of his mother. So that's the same thing, with the Holy Spirit. If you really dig into the etymology of that, you'll find it too is feminine. In fact, there's a concept called viraj in the Vedic, the power of all powers. Even Kundalini translates ultimately, the Ida and Pangalas. These all translate into feminine terms. Sophia in the Gnostic traditions and what have you, right? Incredible stuff there. And it doesn't matter if it's Mithras or Zoroaster or whatever, kind of heroic character you can think about. There's a moment of repose, a moment of marriage, a moment of chemical wedding in which either they're in being armed, these various Perseus and various other heroes are actually given the weapons and the winged feet by the females. You see this picked up in modern movies like Red Sonja, and in Frank Herbert's wonderful Dune series, the Bene Gesserits being more of a ghastly, evil, cult. But you also have power women there who are instrumental in leading the hero, holding a light for him. This is recurrent. You have the dark woman or the Lady of the Lakes, versus the Morganly phase, the malignant, as I said, the malignant version of femininity. I didn't invent it; it's right there. You have the upward pointed pentagram. You have the negative one. You have these cults that have inspired men to the greatest achievements, both artistically and intellectually. And you have also the dark women who takes the good man and destroys him, either through confusion or sexual, debauchery or some other kind of mythic level betrayals and all of this kind of thing. It's absolutely, what would you call it? It's like wall to wall. It's ubiquitous throughout our entire culture. And so that power that is invested in the female can go one way or the other, can't it? Infanticide. You're not just going to blame men of infidelity, incest, hypocrisy, duplicity, manipulation, deception, right? Luring, incarceration, bewitching, murder, infanticide, patricide, regicide. Aren't women as guilty of these things, as I said, when they sat on the thrones of power, or even when they have it domestically? So anyone who can also contribute to the destruction of civilization, can also be the star women and the sun women, and you do see that. You do see a strivance to that, where in the New Age movement, that has been the good part of it, is that women have looked to their power, looked to their sovereignty, not want to follow those banal roles that have been handed down to them by malignant masculinity. And some of the women, unfortunately, react to it in a much more violent, and that's an emotional manner, which I don't think is good. They should just see it for what it is and go through their process. But then you get the other side of the female woman, the female in the New Age movement, where it's not, I don't want to look at anything dark. I've so confronted my demons now, and I've looked at all this evil shit that men have done. Don't disturb me while I'm in this little fuzzy bubble. Well, who told you to do that? You call that evolution? You see, so and men also are guilty of the same thing. There can be this Apollonian distancing and editing of reality, again creeping in, which unfortunately in the New Age movement it has now, where the women have no guts and they're not looking at themselves and they're not looking at the world anymore in a rational way. Some are, but those women are often marginalized. What we have now is again another sort of a battle between women who just refuse to see the realities and these other women who are in the New Age movement or in the conspiracy movement, loving it, reading it, and studying, but they're not being marginalized themselves. I get a lot of emails from women that this is happening to them, where they're being literally marginalized by the family and even by these other groups that they are part of, because anytime they bring up anything conspiratorial or to do with the hidden hand of control or whatever, they're immediately silenced and vetoed and rejected by a lot of the other New Age groups to which they affiliate. So there's dangers all the way down the line.
That's such a good point, and I was actually one of the questions I wanted to talk about was this idea of masculinity and femininity, not just in a physical sense, but also just in terms of thinking in consciousness, right? And if you have an imbalance on either side, you're going to start seeing the more malignant form of that expressed. So if you look at something like the New Age movement, which of course there's a lot of well-intentioned people, there are good things that have come out of that, but there's also a high level of manipulation going on for people to just go back to sleep. And they're using a very, very right-brained but extreme imbalanced right-brained approach, where it's just, your head is just up in the clouds and that's it. There is no solid foundation on the ground balancing it out with the masculine side. So this doesn't always pertain to just physical men and physical women, does it?
No, of course it's not. It's all about orientation, because a man can have a feminine side and a woman can have a masculine side. And anyone also, the danger in a lot of these subjects that we're dealing with is that people on both sides, male and female, just simply get into it as an intellectual pursuit, something to do. I'm bored with life, so now I'm going to read a few books on conspiracy. And so it becomes an intellectual process rather than a spiritual process in which that information is leading you to do inner homework. Now, when people come to my work, they're not going to get very far with that, because I'm always reminding them that anything we're dealing here with, any papers we're pushing, any books that are being written, any interviews we're doing, or any programs are being made, regardless of the interest of the subject matter, it all comes under the heading that you must take this personally. Not only must you take it personally to go on and make further studies than I've ever been able to do, but you also must start to examine, yourself in the context of that. So this is just background. You fill in the background, and then you hope that people will start to say, yeah, when I understand, what you're talking about, Michael, maybe I'm not that interested to become a fucking slave, to Christian church or to the Islamic church or to Judaism or whatever. And that's a big step for these people. And they're gonna again alienate themselves. But it's very good, because they may be alienating themselves from people, but they're relinking themselves to selfhood, and they're relinking themselves to something that is far higher. They're getting in touch with their higher guides, and they may even be contributing down the line to subjects of this kind, teaching their children and not allowing themselves to be surrounded by idiots, so that when they go and do make friends, they're a bit more cautious about the friends they're picking. When they do go and get married, they don't marry a nitwit, a numbskull who's not going to back them up and show interest in these same subjects. All of these things on the smaller scale are essential, because then they lead to bigger things. Smaller things lead to bigger things. I found this stuff to be interesting because I'm very, very, I know the empowerment that comes with it. It's a simple matter of that knowledge empowers you, and you have the revelations, so that may put you on the white squares of knowledge, and then nobody can move you from that, or you remain in ignorance and let other, nitwits and nincompoops get on the white squares and push you around. We have the power. They do not have the power, but they have the control, and they control knowledge. They control its distribution of knowledge. They have the control of edifying you from morning to night with a bunch of just sports and sensations and things that of themselves are okay, but then when you deluged it. So just look at the average mind today. Look at the average child today. Look at the average what's going on in the world of women. Just look at what's happening in the world of men today. And you'll start to see that this is extremely serious. This is not just ancient history or what have you. There's something deeper going on. And my work is going there whether people are into it or not, because to me, way back in Ireland, one of the first things you encounter when you're studying Celts and pre-Celts is the goddess tradition. Some of the most ancient races of my country even their name referred to a goddess, and every part of their rites and rituals. But these are, on the surface, warrior classes. But the women were right there, sword in hand, defending against the enemy. They were the highest caste of priestesses. Right? Even when kings sat, they often sat in a manner that represented the female. The throne upon which they sat was on a mound or a hill. Sometimes, like in the case of a place called Derry, 3 kings sat. Well, we know that the 3 spirals is the patent symbol of Ireland, but that idea comes again from the triple goddess. I've gone into this in my Path of the Fool series a little bit, and then it goes on. It goes on where they understood that the whole earth, let alone the sky, was personified in a female goddess, or in some cases androgynous. That the waxing of the moon may have been masculine, but the waning of the moon is feminine. So everything was in a state of balance. Now we, in the modern age, have deeply lost this sense of balance in every which way you can imagine. And that's because we had malignant parents who had malignant parents before them, and so on. So this work, no matter how interesting the subject matter is, it's based on you realigning yourself and reattuning yourself, both with yourself, with the earth and the sky. This is the holy work. It's simply not an intellectual exercise, which a lot of people today in the New Age movement and in the conspiratorial community are thinking that it is. It's the accumulation of facts, and then the regurgitation of those facts. It's partly that, but it's so much more spiritual. It's about trying to find a wholeness that our ancient forebears experienced and had, but the methodology of teaching that to the moderns, you see, has been occluded and lost, but can easily be found back by reverent people who go back to see how these forebears, what they were doing.
It's so interesting that you say that, Michael, in regards to this work and this information, is that I see the same struggle taking place within the martial art community, of course, which I'm a part of, and I try to bring back the lost philosophy and wisdom from the original warrior traditions, and how there is nothing but a focus on, like, as in this research field, they're focusing on only the intellectual aspect of it and just acquiring facts. In the martial art community, they're focusing purely on the physical dominance factor and just what's the best technique to win, how do you choke somebody out the best way, how do you get a knockout in a fight or whatever, and those are the focus points. Whereas I've always taught it from the original tradition, which is that this is really just metaphoric. It's a spiritual process, really. All of these obstacles and opponents that you might come upon in your training are just there to challenge your spirit and your mind and your being, and to grow and to keep moving upwards. So there shouldn't be a focus on just what kind of physical attributes you can gain. That is just a process of which you are expressing your spirit and learning about who you are, why you're here, and where you're going. So I just wanted to echo that from this, and you can see this everywhere. You can see this in all kinds of expressions of art and culture, where there's a movement towards focusing purely on the aesthetic, purely on the exoteric, if you will, and losing that deeper aspect and the deeper knowledge and wisdom that's actually being thought about and portrayed there.
And it's interesting too, paradoxically, because when we talk there about what is the malignant versions, we omitted to talk about what might be a more positive version of the masculinity and the femininity. If masculinity went down through the technology and has turned people into what you've said, where there's no inwardness at all, every sport is done for the purest physical purposes. Martial arts is done for that as well. Some stupid, clueless, a person just wanting to muscle up and be the big macho boy at the bar and take on some other, guy, and all of this nonsense, with all of the esoteric aspects completely nixed. On the female side, you have immense beauty in some ladies and some beautiful women who just their beauty alone could transform the world. You and I are pushing stones uphill like some mad Sisyphus to move people on one smegging inch. But a beautiful female, right, with the same knowledge and skills, the whole world will follow that person to a higher light, to a higher truth.
Yeah.
Just effortlessly. People like Elvis, these androgynous people, just to look at them, it's like a light. Well, there's many women who have this power, but do you find women doing that? Or are they misusing it? Misusing their sexual and other traits that the universal force has given them? Do you see anyone thinking that they now have a biological and a psychological duty to perform? Not a chance. They follow along whatever women's magazine is telling them they should be, eating that stuff up. But the positive aspect of the feminine is literally the mysteries with a capital M. That's it. Any initiate, and I don't care who you're talking about, Pythagoras, Paracelsus, any of these ancient ones of the ancient times always were initiated through the female. And then they were initiated into that which is called the mysteries. Now, today we just use that term without realizing what it means. The word mystery comes from a word indicating female. Mesta. That's where we get the word mist from, and mystery.
I didn't know that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a female word, and it actually represents the underground, the grotto, which was always the traditional haunt of the female, is the underground. That's why all churches have a crypt. But before churches were built, you see, you had your grotto, and you had your caves. That's why Leonardo da Vinci painted the two females in the grotto. Everyone looks at the women, but they don't think, what's this terrain that they're in? That is the center of the initiation. That's the knight or the king or the hero having to go into the underworld. And until he's matriculated through those rites, and there can be 6 or 12, depending on the culture that you're dealing with, but when he has to pass through, only then is he truly the risen sun. Only then is he Sol Invictus. So we put the focus on, the king, the big knob, the big kahuna. Yeah, Horus, Gilgamesh, right? Samson and all that. Yeah, how did they get to be that? They got to be that by entering into the underworld. Samson and Delilah. Delilah means door of darkness. D''Lila is door of darkness. It represented the Libra, Virgo signs when the sun falls into the darkness. And then the only light that he can use is a feminine light. My God, how important this is to the men of the world today who don't have that feminine light any more than the women today have the true masculine aspirations. So that the journey into this place is then the light that is held before you is a feminine light of a kind, right? The starlight that takes you into the underworld, and that is the role of the of the shamanic female in your life. You might even be bumping into them in your own female relationships. Men do. Cultures do. But if those women are being flattened out, if the upbringing that they have has never introduced them to this role of femininity, either by their fathers or their mothers, and if they are just walking through the world clueless, and bit by bit by bit, it's like having coins falling out of your pocket, bit by bit by bit, they're becoming completely spiritually naked. Then what does that mean for their sons and for their future daughters? So this is crucial. So that is that's just one anecdote. That's why temples, as I said, unashamedly in the past. Think of the oracle at Delphi. Think of the group called the Sibyllines, right? The Sibylline oracles, the Sibyls, Sybil. Look, people should look that word up. All the emperors bowed before these goddesses and priestesses. There wasn't a philosopher. Socrates himself, he said his mentor was, what's her name? Can't remember right now. But he had a female being that he dealt with in the streets of Athens that put him on his road, right? Emperors, as I say, bowed, went to the oracles to hear what was what. Not only for personal prophecy, but even for state predictions. The prophecies of the prophetess and all of that, and her acolytes. Where's this all gone today? You're going to turn to Cosmopolitan and Vogue magazine. That's where the prophecies are now today, on how to deceive more men and erotically seduce and waylay. Isn't that destroying both women and men? Everything that women are told today is a destruction not just of men, but of women themselves. And so you have to do then a research, isn't it, to find out who's behind these rotten, filthy media outlets, and then look at their symbolism. Then you start to get it.
And it's in front of everybody's face now. I mean, you just look at the media and the way that we are seeing, especially young kids, looking at these so-called role models in the media, in Hollywood, etc., where it's actually just nothing but the worst kind of malignant femininity being danced around on stage for people to aspire towards. It's absolutely grotesque. And then to talk also about the real women and the real priestesses and getting into this, I remember that quote that you talked about at one point. It was a 5,000-year-old Gaelic Celtic prophecy where they were saying, and this is about predictions, I mean, look at the time we're in and listen to what this woman says. She says, "Then she, the priestess, added a prophecy in which she foretold the approaching end of the divine age and the beginning of a new one, in which the summers would be flowerless, the cows milkless, and the women shameless, and the men strengthless, in which there will be trees without fruit and seas without fish, and old men would give false judgments, and legislators make unjust laws. Then warriors would betray one another, and men would be thieves, and there would be no more virtue in the world. Like, holy crap, if you can't describe thousands of years ago what's happening now better than that, I don't know, man.
That's at least 5,000 years old, and it was from Irish priestesses after a great battle. You find the same motif in the Nordic Edda. You find it in the Puranas of India, the fall into the Kal age. And it's called Kali because she represented the dark side of the malignant female. So this is what set me off in this research. So we have to sort of come down to earth and realize that there was a vision that people had in ancient times, not just, recent times, but in very ancient times, seeing the fate, because they knew about cycles that we have no clue about. Then these stories came down, and you do find them in the fairy tales, you do find them even in the Bible and other sacred works, there's no question about that. But right now, I think that it's important for women to start taking a look at their own history, and unfortunately, it does include a criminal history, just like in the way of men, they have to look at theirs as well. And so that's what this project is really going to be, because I believe that this society of the sisterhood, as we call it, does exist. They have been operating behind the largely male societies. Studying back to the very origins, it turns out that there was indeed a collusion in ancient days, and that this group of females were either genetically altered themselves, but at some point they were given great access to great power beyond imagination, technological power. And so, and then, as I say, we've been talking about splits and dualities. At that point, this is ancient history, but it can be accepted by any psychologist. And that is that there's two kinds of attitude towards the opposite sex. Men have it towards women, and women have it towards men. One is authentic, and the other is neurotic. And so just in the same way that men can hate women, or hate their mothers, or envy beauty in women or whatever, so on the opposite can women envy the strength and the tenacity and the will of men. And so this is not just, I believe that this is not constricted to our time. I think that's part of the myopia that I spoke of earlier, of only looking at our centuries. This kind of neuroticness, neuroses, existed in ancient times as well. And it comes into our story very much, because when the power women, they had an attitude of deep envy towards the normal nature-given, strengths that the males possessed. There was an antipathy there. Now it's kind of ludicrous, isn't it? Because those powers that man have, just like the powers that women have, are nature-given. So it's a form of nature hate, actually, which is going on. But the story goes that this genocide occurred because when you had the almost magical-like technology at your fingertips, the technology that the Nephilim brought, then you don't need the muscular strength. And so the women of the neurotic kind saw to it that there was a genocide. It's written there, right, in the ancient mythologies. You only have to read it. And I'll be presenting those mythologies in the film and in the talk that we're going to do. So this is a no-brainer when you actually find out that this antipathy existed. But the thing was, as I recounted in the Atlantis book, that a point came during the War of the Gods where a lot of the technology was destroyed because of the upheavals that occurred, subsequent to the War of the Gods. And so then a new Mark II male Adamic type of being had to be created. So there's actually two different kinds, at least two kinds, maybe even be more, of what we refer to as masculinity in the world. And that neurosis within women of envying, you see, the authentic woman admires the male strengths, just as the authentic man admires the beauty and the softness and the gentility and the motherly qualities, you see, that women have, right? So the neurotic female envies, and there is all the difference in the world. And that split, that duad between admiration and envy has changed the course of our history. But it didn't happen in historical times. It actually, we're only seeing the after effects. Everything that exists in the gender war, of the last 10,000 years is actually derivative. And when you trawl through, as I've done, the ancient mythologies, the ancient religious motifs, you find this axiomatically. You're convinced of it, absolutely, in the sense that there are these goddess images of the dark female and the other more accepting, and solar female, which you also have in the Genesis story as well, with the Lilith and the Eve, and it's a motif that just carries on down. It's been presented to us by duplicitous overlords, so we haven't really read it right. So a lot of my work will assist people to reread this stuff and see it in a different way, to cast light on these particular kinds of dualisms and make more sense of it than the Bible has done. I mean, after all, in the Genesis, they're telling you that the male gives birth to the female. Yeah, right. We're really on the right track there. Yeah. Jesus Christ. If things don't need to be turned around, I don't know what to say.
Oh, absolutely. And if we just, we got about another 10, 15 minutes here, Michael, let's just give people a few examples of some, in modern times, we have still the power behind, say, the throne of the Queen of England. And of course, I live in Canada, so we're a Commonwealth, a vassal state of the Crown Corporation. And she sits there at the top of many different Masonic lodges, and she commands a lot more than people give credit. And here in Canada, anywhere you go on Canada Day or any of these celebrations, or when they roll out the new prince and his wife and his baby on the screen, or they come visit, there's red carpets, there's festivals, there's celebrations, everybody's having little tea parties in their house, and it's just an incredible spectacle to see, because a lot of people here hold reverence for the Queen and what's going on, but a lot of them don't realize the history of this family, the history of power and control, and a lot of people look at the Queen just as mere decoration. But behind the scenes, we know that, of course, there in England and the history of the royals and what's going on with the banking dynasties, and if you go all the way to the top, connecting it to the Vatican and the Jesuits, etc., you can see that this Queen and these people sitting on this throne have never lost their power or relinquished it. In fact, it seems like they've gone more underground, and perhaps it could be said that they hold more power today than they ever did in ancient times. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Oh, exactly. I mean, just as I said before, that Jesus, even during his anointing, forget his resurrection or his death or his birth, the very anointing was done by a woman. And if you examine, as I've done, the Queen's coronation, it's all there too. The top males are bowing before her. Even the head of Mark Masonry, which is an Alpha Lodge of Masonry, right, the Duke of Kent, getting on his knees. There's the symbolism of the 3. There's the symbolism of the 4. There's the symbolism of the sapphire and the ruby. All of this symbolism of the scepter and the orb. The orb in the hand is a sphere with a cross on it. Go to Wikipedia or any online encyclopedia and look up the symbol of Venus. The chair she sits on, the seat, that was the image of Isis, is the seat, the royal seat. The symbolism is there. The hymns, the regalia, the Kabbalistic symbolism, I went into it in that Queen's coronation thing. But the whole idea, again, that the meetings that you just mentioned, when the Queen, goes on her walkabouts all over the shop, watch the dates. A lot of them are based on the calendar that this female Illuminati used, which is actually a 13 sign of the zodiac calendar. And the design of Buckingham Palace is also based on this. We tend to look at some of the masculine symbolism, but there's serpentine symbolism there, there's the number 13 there, there's all sorts of other constellations that are used by this order, so that when their representatives go around, the drapery that they have, you find symbolisms of Neptune, you see symbolism of Venus, as I said, the dove. And we're still in the early stages of, this is what motivated me to carry on, you see, is because we're in the early stages of deciphering what the symbolism means, and that's why the job isn't over yet. We've got to look at some of the terms. What does the word queen mean? Where did that word come from? And again, looking at the astrology, because these ancient people have ancient ways. We may have thought of ourselves as being modernized because we're living in this 21st century, that whole myth of progress. But these people hold on to the traditions of great antiquity, and they haven't stopped. So when a researcher like myself goes into looking at these matters, you've got more than you can handle, because these people still obey and still honor some of these ancient rituals, which when you know how to decode them, you see, it all goes back to Semiramis and to Isis and what have you, to Cybele, for instance, a very important goddess, talked about in the Path of the Fool series. So it's all there. It just takes the curiosity and the understanding, as you said originally, to not fundamentalize, to not become rigid, and to keep on, reinvestigating and reinvestigating, and take what you think you know and turn it around again and look at it in different light and in different ways. This is essential for this movement to continue.
Absolutely. And I think that's really the message here. And I just want to encourage people to check out the work that Michael has already done. Go check out, the different websites. You can get everything at mtsar.com. And of course, you can, for this subject, femaleilluminati.com. And I also urge you to go check out modernknowledge.ca for more information and upcoming videos. And Michael, we're going to be doing and organizing some follow-up interviews for people and getting people ready for the upcoming tour that we're going to be doing here in Canada, talking about these subjects. I very much look forward to it. Each event is probably going to be a good 6, 7, who knows, maybe even 8 hours long. We're going to cover a lot of material about this, so we're going to get into the details. And Michael, maybe just in the last couple minutes, if you just wanted to share any other things about how the talk is going to be structured and some of the other points you're going to be bringing into it for people.
Well, exactly. I'm looking very excited now to doing this. It'll be the first time ever live on stage doing the Female Illuminati in Canada next April, late March into April. I'm very excited about that, to share this work with everyone. Thanks to you guys, David and Chris, for letting us do that. And anyone who wants to keep in touch with us, make sure you send us your email to be personally informed about the final touches on the film, Female Illuminati, or the dates and content of the event coming up. Visit me at michaeltsarion.com. You'll find connections to the social media on that site. You can go to femaleilluminati.com, where you'll see some, again, background information. There's a constantly updated website, or contact me personally so we have your emails, so that you can be kept up to speed with what's going on, because I believe this is an information that's actually crucial to get out at this time.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking this time, for getting into these subjects. I look forward to discussing this more and looking into this more for myself. I'm very excited as well, as is Chris, about the upcoming tour in March and April there. So let's hope that we get enough support for that event. So folks, please support the work. Check it out. Research it for yourself. Again, the websites are michaeltsarion.com, femaleilluminati.com, and of course, modernknowledge.ca. And that'll do it for us today. So thanks again for joining me here, Michael.
You're welcome, David. Talk soon.